So welcome, Sue, to the Flower Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks so much for having me on today.
I have been looking forward to this. I think we spoke for the first time back in July, and I have been looking forward to doing this ever since. And I totally feel for you right now because we just got done moving, and I know you're in the middle of going through that craziness too right now. So I feel for you. And thank you for taking the time to do this interview. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I think it's exciting. Thanks, Scott. Thanks.
So, one of the things I always love to ask, I always start the beginning with, is your story. Like, how did you get into the world of flowers and floristry?
Well, kind of a weird road. I was a clinical social worker, and I worked with abused and neglected kids and had a little private practice of psychotherapy on the side, working with families. And it was difficult, and there was no real tangible outcome to what I was doing. I mean, people were being helped and getting better and whatnot, but I have always loved to garden. And oh my gosh, sometime I'll tell you a crazy story about in college when I was foraging on my way home, and the nice lady was sitting in the dark on her porch waiting for someone to forage on their way home from class. I got into so much trouble. It was awful.
Gosh.
I know. So I've always loved being around flowers, having them near me, and gardening. And I started doing projects for friends and different smaller parties and weddings and Christmas decorating. And then it just sort of blossomed. And then I just ended up with some great press, and the rest is sort of history.
Wow, that's amazing. And so how old were you, or was it in college when you started then, or was it actually, I guess maybe the question I should ask is, so when did you start your business officially?
It was about 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, that I actually started charging people for my work. And right around, I guess around 7 years ago, I started working with farmers. Great friend out in Seattle is a farmer, and she wanted to train farmers to grow flowers in a small area. And I was there to sort of help with the get over your fears kind of piece of it, and then train them to deal with brides and to design with these wonderful flowers that they had. So that is sort of how I moved into the training piece of it, in addition to my own business of weddings, and became a freelancer almost right away, because really I wanted to learn from other designers, and worked with some incredible designers around the country. And then about a year ago, got a call from the White House to interview with them to become a contractor and start working a little bit for the house, just with their bigger events and regular daily deliveries.
Wow. So do you still do that now?
Well, not since March, when they shut down the non-essentials. And so that's definitely not. But the wedding industry has been, the smaller weddings and the brides scrambling around to make a beautiful time out of, a difficult situation has been really, really rewarding, actually. It's been great.
That's awesome. Well, I think, one of the things when we spoke earlier that really stood out to me is that you really have this heart for wanting to help people, wanting to train people, and empower them to have their own business, or have their own, or to be freelancers or whatever. And I am so impressed with that. I know some of the questions that we've been getting recently have to do with, like, how do I start my business? How do I begin this process? And everyone feels like it's more than just going out and printing some business cards, or getting a social media page. I mean, it feels like it should be more complicated than that. And I kind of think it is. And so I'd really love sort of some insights from you, maybe on maybe some good places to start.
Yeah, I think well, thank you for saying that about wanting to, train people. A big part of me is wanting to raise others up. And I've been a mentor to a good number of new designers who are starting businesses. And I think that would be my first suggestion. Really, there are some amazing designers out there that are now offering mentorship. Sweet Root Village is one of them. Amy Nicole Floral offers mentorship. Those are the two that I have here in our area, just off the top of my head, who are amazing designers and really marketing geniuses and great bosses. And anyway, to find someone that you can work with, that you can trust. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pay someone. If you come to a workshop, a freelance workshop that I do, and we hit it off, and you need some direction, some information on what are great suppliers for different things, or what are the mechanics that would be great behind this. Find someone that you can trust, that you can call and ask, how much should I charge for this? And we can work through that kind of thing. And but there are some really terrific courses out there as well that really can help with that.
I love that as a starting point. I know, especially because the reason why I feel like that is so fundamental is because there's a lot of Facebook groups, and I hear people ask those kinds of questions of the group, and things vary so much depending what part of the country you're in, and what does it take to source flowers. Like, do you have anybody near you, or do you have to ship everything in? There's these hidden expenses, and a mentor, especially somebody that's in an area or is familiar with an area of the country that you're in, that maybe can give you not just some advice, but real practical advice, real depth.
Right. And yes, and support for when things
Yes.
get hard, because this is a hard job. And I mean, it's physical and it's emotional and it's stressful, and have someone there to, maybe work with on some of their weddings, but to sort of see, how do they handle their staff? How do they handle the stress? How do they handle when the planner has a huge problem? And how do you punt? Because there's so much of that in our businesses, this just happened, or this didn't show up, and what am I going to do? Because I have to make this work, and it's going to be beautiful. So it's tricky, but to have support and someone you can trust in your area, as you said, is really, really helpful.
I love that. So then, what do you recommend next? Do you feel like it's better to put your shingle out? Obviously, I think education is part of it, but your shingle, or is it better to freelance first? I mean, maybe it depends on the person.
I think it does depend on the person, but if I would stick with getting a little bit of experience first, freelancing, because especially with this new phase that the industry is moving into in the next,
right,
how long it's going to take, and how I really think that the industry has changed, probably permanently. I think freelancing with someone allows you to understand the pace that it takes, and to really absorb how to do stuff. And, we can hang out a shingle, and even after working for so many years, I seriously, sometimes I'll finish up a wedding and I'll look back and I'll think, how on earth did I do that? I have no idea how I got through that. I still feel like I'm faking it until I can make it. So to actually fake it till you make it, when you're like really faking it and don't know much of anything, I would think would be so difficult and so much more stressful than it would have to be. Work with someone that you can learn from as a freelancer or as a mentor, but also start out small. If your neighbor has a christening or a birthday party, or just 3 little arrangements, see how that goes. Can you deliver it on time? Can you make a little bit of a profit? All of that stuff is so key. And then I think, honestly, the next step, once you have hung your shingle and you're up on social media, a website is so key. And even if you're just doing photo shoots to get some really terrific shots, I think that is a great way to kick off a business. Because if, for instance, when I was first starting, I helped some photographers who were putting on their workshops, and they needed a floral designer to come in and give them something to shoot. They would have a bride, the model, they'd have a dress. And what happened was all of these photographers who were asked to, or who were paying to learn, took their photos of my flowers and posted them. So there were 12 photographers posting my flowers, and the person who was running the workshop, who was pretty darn well known, they were posting my flowers. And it just created this basis from which to spring forward. It gave me photos for the website. It gave me photos for social media. Super important to post only what you want to be doing. For instance, I'm not huge into wanting to do big weddings that have lots of, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's just not my style. My style is a little bit more garden inspired and whatnot. So if, as a new designer, your style is more hydrangeas and orchids, then post those photos. Mine isn't. So I posted the photos of the work that I wanted to do. The kind of client that I wanted to attract wanted a little bit looser, more fun garden style originally. And so when it comes to social media and those photos, post only really terrific, clear, high quality photos. And that's where the doing workshops with the photographers come into business, and also photo shoots, but also just post what you want to be doing. A lot of work that we do as florists, well, not a lot, but in the beginning, a lot of the work is work that we are doing to pay the bills.
Right.
So oftentimes we'll do weddings that are not Instagrammable. A friend of mine who's an amazing florist did a wedding and the flowers were stunning. They were just beautiful. And the bride and groom were really into Pokemon, or I think it was Pokemon. And they had little Pokemon figures or something all over the tables and and she'd worked so hard on these flowers, but she knew in the end, this was not going to be an Instagrammable wedding, but it would pay some bills, which was great.
I love that. That's a good point. And, and it's funny, you can still get photographs of the flowers pre-Pokemon. And so, it wasn't like, you still have opportunities even tucked in amongst the themed events, maybe. I don't know. Right. I don't know a nice way to put that. But I love the idea of the partnering with the photographers, especially because when usually people at a workshop like that, they're all trying to learn and grow their businesses too.
Yes.
And I know that we've had it said before, and I can't remember who my guest was, but they suggested partnering with people that were at the same level. Gosh, that's going to drive me crazy now. Who was it? I want to say it was Sweet Root Village. I think it was Lauren and Rachel. And so that said, because then they're motivated to share those images too, because they're trying to really build their business.
Exactly.
And they don't have much in their portfolio of that kind of, style or quality. And if everyone's tagging everyone and promoting everyone, then it's definitely a win-win-win. So I love that idea. How do you feel, one question that sometimes we get is about like space. When do you know it's time to go get that brick and mortar place, or is it, maybe it's better to have a studio where it's inexpensive? I don't know. I mean, I just kind of want to throw that out there and see what you think about it.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that, especially with moving, because right now we're in a big space that has a massive basement that I was able to turn a big room into a huge walk-in cooler with a Home Depot air conditioning unit and a cool bot, which suddenly I've got this huge walk-in cooler, and that allowed me to start designing days before when I would have without that kind of refrigeration. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it because we're downsizing and we're not going to have that kind of space. So do I rent space? When do you decide, as you're saying? And something that I've been considering that I think is a really, is going to be something that happens more and more, is sharing space with other creatives. Mm. So you partner with a photographer and a planner and a lighting person, and you gather a whole team together and you rent a space, and you've got one corner that has a beautiful table and shelves with different options of linens or vases, whatever. And then you've got a workspace. So that's something that I've been considering doing. Another option is to find someone who does have space and rent time. But I think that renting your own brick and mortar or renting your own space, when things are as unclear in the industry right now, I think you could probably get a really great deal on some space, but I think it would be I think it would perhaps be a bigger risk than a new company might want to take on. So as we are moving and I'm thinking all of this through, my first choice is to have a studio in-house, a space in-house that I can just put everything away, keep everything stored so that I'm not back and forth from a storage unit. And I think that thinking about the economy of time and the economy of movement is really important in our industry, because it's so time intensive and it's physical, as I said, as you know. To have everything in one place, I think and organized is really important. So brick and mortar, I don't think the industry is headed in that direction, but sharing a space, renting someone else's space for different times that it's free, I think is brilliant. I think is a really great way to go.
I agree. And it's interesting because I feel like, nowadays you see all of these co-working spaces that are, with more office oriented and have receptionists. And, I think that if somebody was listening to this episode, it would be a great idea, because I know some wholesalers that are doing this, but where they actually are creating like a co-working space with refrigeration, with tables, where you might have up to 5 people, 5 companies, or individuals with weddings come and work in a space and do that. And I would encourage you, too, to just ask around your area, because that might be, there may be a wholesaler that's willing to do that, for either a nominal fee, or you may have to source your product through them. But either way, it might be worth it. I mean, it's
win-win.
Yeah, totally. Recently, in fact, we just released an episode with Mandy Majerick, and we were talking about staffing and things like that. And I feel like, at some point, you have to make that decision whether you get help. But I feel like for a lot of smaller businesses, it's really about the freelancers. It's really, because you don't have a wedding every single week when you're starting out. Is there, this is kind of a loaded question, so forgive me, but I'm like, is there a great way to, like, if you're in an area and you're trying to find out like who those freelancers are in that area? I know that's a passion project of yours as well, but I'm just trying to think, is there a good, like, call your wholesale? I mean, I don't know who's a good way to find out now. I mean, there may be better ways in the future, but right now, hint, hint. But I think, I think that I'm just curious how you would suggest someone approach that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, starting with your wholesaler is a great place, because they talk to all of the different designers in the area and know who's working and know who needs help and know who gives help. Another great way that I've been able to find freelancers is to gather together a luncheon. Come for social distance coffee and sweets, kind of a let's talk about business thing. And you invite every designer in the area to come, and you make connections that way. And you can offer, can I freelance for you? Do you ever freelance? Do you want to partner up? If I happen to get COVID, what's going to happen to my weddings? Can I pass them off to you? That kind of thing. Farmers in the area are wonderful designers usually, and wonderful, incredibly hard workers, hardest job in
Right.
America. And they often will freelance and also need freelancers for some of their events. Workshops you go to, meeting different designers, that if you go to workshop with a big name up in New York City or somewhere, to just get a little bit of creative motivation, or just to feel better about the industry, go to a workshop and design with them and learn and be filled, and then make friends with the people around you. And that's how you kind of make your flower friends. And I did a big wedding and was able to call friends from a friend from Mexico, a friend from Michigan, friends from all over the country, North Carolina, California, flew everybody in for this big wedding and had a great time, rented an Airbnb. This was before COVID, rented an Airbnb and worked together and had dinners together. And it was fantastic. Yeah. So flower friends are such a good way to find freelancers. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way. I think we often, I don't know, one of the things that we do here, and just sort of, I don't know, it weighs on my heart just a little bit, is that how isolated people feel sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think especially when you're starting out new and you're pounding the pavement, you're posting on social media, and you're trying to make these connections, and depending on your personality type, you can roll with it easier than others. Some people, that's a big mountain to overcome. Yeah. And just being able to connect with other people in your area that have the same, ideas, the same desires, the same passions, that they're trying to start their flower, business. And I know when I was growing up in the industry, competition was a big deal. And I'm so thankful that so many areas have really embraced the collaboration mentality. And I feel like, especially, there's a certain size business, from beginner to, I don't know, maybe you're doing 20 weddings a weekend. Sorry, that's not right. 20 weddings a year. Maybe when you're growing your business, there's this window when you have some weekends off and some you're working, and vice versa for other people. And it's a real opportunity to lock arms with other individuals. And one of the things I wanted to say that I kind of felt like, when you hinted at it earlier, when you're freelancing and you're working with and for other people, one of the things I feel like you get is this idea of processes, like workflow, and how you manage certain things, from either opening your boxes of flowers and processing them, to how far in advance can you do a boutonniere, and how, it's these kinds of things that, it's interesting sometimes. Like, I've worked for people and I'm like, I will never do it that way. And I've worked for other people, I'm like, wow, that was really awesome. And you just gain so much insight, I think, about that one thing alone, just workflow.
I agree. I think that's huge, and not something that you can just sort of, I don't know, stumble through. It's really helpful to know, when should the flowers arrive? When do you, as you were saying. And the other thing you said that really has struck me over the last few years, well, really always, is that when you give back, you end up with this incredible connection and being so much, just having your soul fed. And so if you do have a weekend where you don't have, or Mondays and Tuesdays are very slow in our industries. And so Mondays and Tuesdays, you go and you volunteer with veterans, or with single moms, or with at a women's shelter, and you teach them how to do flowers, and they feel the beauty and that someone's caring about them enough to come here, and you feel so connected. And you know, service is a huge piece of what I do and what the underpinning of what I do. And wanting to serve communities that are underserved is, I think, a terrific way to feel connected, feel good about yourself, feel better about where we are in the industry, and also to really build a pool of workers who are competent and who need to work. And everybody wins when you do stuff like that.
Wow. It's interesting. We did an Instagram live with Lauren and Rachel earlier this week. And that was one of the topics I brought up, is the sense of community.
Yeah.
Because I think some people take the time and sit back and they see these things. They see this need, and it's kind of tricky because it's not like a need that's obvious to people, because people that are hurting or people that are struggling, you don't always see that. And especially if it's in a different circle or a different walk of life than perhaps you're in, you might not see that women's shelter. You might not be a part of that, but you know that they're there, and just how working with flowers feeds our creativity, feeds our soul, brightens our day. Someone who doesn't have that luxury or awareness to even think about that, for someone to reach out to them and to say, hey, I'd love to host this workshop, and then maybe even partner with another designer or two, so you can have more hands-on experience. And then also you can share the cost of the product, or maybe even get, a Trader Joe's to donate something, or a wholesaler to donate something, or something, but I feel like I just love that. I love that so much. And I'm so glad you shared it, because, it's just not something we always think about, because, so many times especially with COVID, we've all been so focused on ourselves and staying safe and staying healthy and worrying about our own families and things, that there's a lot of people that have fallen through the cracks.
Right. Well, and I think that even sometimes through COVID, what Lauren and Rachel at Sweet Root Village have done is really, they have a lot of people depending on them, on their staff, and they are givers. And they worry about their staff, and they worry about the people around them. Some of us through this time have to worry about ourselves and worry about, how am I going to pay the bills? That wedding just canceled again. And this wedding, how am I going to take care of my kids? Now I'm homeschooling. Right. And now I'm, and sometimes we are just so busy that we can't look up and see the needs around us. We just sometimes can't. But I think that making the time for that, even if you're bringing your kids with you to teach them about giving back, I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but I just think it's so incredibly fulfilling and can pull people out of the anxiety or the depression or, whatever else we're experiencing during this time. But going and giving back is a wonderful way to, selfishly feel better, but also in the process, help someone else maybe feel better too.
Right. Well, and I think sometimes it's a combination of gaining perspective and then just getting our eyes, taking the time. And it's hard, because I feel like so many people have struggled through this time with all kinds of things, from depression or anxiety, or just with so many weddings being postponed and canceled, and I feel like it's hard to sometimes to pick yourself up and to move forward. But I think when you can work with someone else, and again, the women's shelter comes to mind, but, or I've known people who have worked with like girls organizations, and, like big brother, big sister kind of situations, and have girls come in. Like we hosted a design workshop, and it was a bunch of teenage girls that, you know,
Yeah.
had some challenges, and it was just great to see them light up, you know, when they, you know, got to create something and to work with beautiful flowers.
Right.
And I think it's just something that sometimes just us getting us out of our situation and realize, just gaining that perspective that sometimes we're not maybe as bad off as we think we are. I mean, or maybe it just lets us have that perspective that, you know, we can, even though we may not have the resources or we may not have certain things, we have time that if we can give that back, it just, I don't know, like you said, it's kind of selfish in a way, but there's benefits to it. Okay, so I mean, I know we're getting really in this vein of thought, which I really love, because it's not something we talk about very often, and I feel like, especially now, you know, the holidays are around the corner. That's tough for a lot of people, and you know, what a great way to kind of give back. So I know one of the things that we talked about briefly back over the summer, that I had written down that I thought was really interesting, was this idea of, and so now I'm catching you in left field, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This idea of business standardization,
Mm.
and how can we approach that? Because everyone comes from, like we've already talked about, all these different scenarios, different places to start. I don't know, when I say that, what comes to mind for you?
Well, in our industry, there hasn't been a big discussion about standardizing freelancers. And so I built my business on using only freelancers. I don't have full-time employees. I don't work every weekend to keep a full-time staff busy. And so I have been thinking a lot about contracts and paying, and what skills, do you need to have to earn a certain amount of pay? And
For freelancers.
Yes, for freelancers. Yes.
Yeah. Just making sure.
So in terms of standardizing that piece of it, I think it's going to be really important to continue having that discussion. And so I've worked out a bunch of different job descriptions, for instance, that if you're here to learn and you're washing buckets and you're helping me set up, then there's a certain level of pay that is compensating that type of learner. If you're a full-time floral designer and you're being flown in to run one of the 3 weddings that a designer is doing, then you're going to earn that amount of pay and you'll be compensated this way. And if you're running a team, that kind of thing. So I think that part of the confusion, and when do you bring in a freelancer to help you run your business, and when do you make that commitment, and when do you start spending that money? I think it's going to be much less of a stumbling block if there are things in place like the contract that you can send to the freelancer that has things in it like expectations for phone use during the day, or that I'll be providing snacks and water throughout the day, and I'll bring in lunch on Fridays, or whatever, just to sort of standardize things based on each individual's business and how they want to run their business or are able to run their business, just to give them a baseline from which to spring, I think is incredibly important.
3 o'clock.
Who was that? No, it's 3 o'clock somewhere. So anyway, we'll cut this out. That's hilarious. Okay, so when you're talking about standardization, you're actually, and I love this, you're actually talking about the freelancer as an independent contractor, like they're their own business.
Yes.
And it's so funny because I think a lot of times people don't think that way.
Right.
And sometimes they get into trouble because, maybe at the end of the year, they didn't allot enough for taxes, or they didn't, or all that kind of stuff, which
Right.
I think is really great, that, to deal with. But what I do love the most, because I have freelance for not tons, but a lot of different people. And every time you don't really know what there's like this expectation. And it's like, one person, it's kind of like, well, you don't eat, so
Yep.
hopefully you brought some snacks. And there's other people that are kind of like my mom and decide, well, we're going to stop for an hour. We're going to make sure everybody gets a break. And there's an amazing meal that's coming, and all this kind of stuff. And there's everything in between, to even dress code and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like that is really good. I mean, how do people respond when you say, well, I have this contract I'd really like to present you with? Do they like freak out, or is it something?
No,
Yeah.
they don't. They're like, oh my gosh, thank you for that. And because I think that if the whole transaction is treated as a business to business transaction, then there's a certain amount of respect going in each direction. I can be sure that you're really going to show up as a business owner, and that you can be sure that I'm going to pay you at a certain level, and that if you have certain expectations. So, for instance, when I freelance, I love to have a sample. I just love that, because I want to be sure that I am doing exactly what the designer wants me to do. And so we can talk about it, and, it has this kind of a flow, or it's tighter this way, or this is a recipe or not a recipe. Everybody works very differently, but something that I really love is to have a sample. And if I can't have a sample, then I'd really love to have a photo, something visually to help me understand what it is you're hoping for. And so that's something that I put in my if I have to send if it's a big job and I send a contract, then that's what I put in the contract, or I request that be provided me. But there are lots of folks who don't work that way. They don't work with a recipe, and so, which I totally respect. And so, to be able to kind of provide options for people, these are some things you need to think about communicating to your freelancers. These are some things you need to think about communicating to the business you're going to freelance for. I think that it's just opening up a better business-to-business relationship, because truly it's sort of a communication thing that when it falls apart, people get angry. People don't get paid the way they think they ought to have been paid. Just expectations, meeting everybody's expectations, I think, is a really good idea. And just having resources like a contract available to you, like information on what is a contractor, and are you an employee, and who pays your taxes, and do I pay your health insurance, and just to sort of a place where people can go to ask those questions and get clear answers, is what I'm really working on.
And having freelanced a lot, you obviously identify these pain points. Yes. Having hired freelancers a lot, you obviously have and it's interesting, it's probably both sides of this equation have their own pain points.
Absolutely.
I know I've sat there and I've never worried about it, because usually when I was freelancing, I was just helping somebody out, and I was glad to do it. I already had a 70-hour a week job, so I kind of, it's just fun to kind of need to take a weekend and do that sometimes. But I know people have asked me, well, do you know when we're going to get paid, or do you know how that works? And and I just think it'd be kind of sad to work for somebody and then not know when you're going to get paid, or not know how do they deal with all these different things. And I just love this idea of this contract. I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
One thing I think too that I hear, which I'm curious if this is something that you work with when you were working with freelancers. I love the way you already described the fact you've got some that are learning, they're at this sort of entry level, and they're doing buckets and doing some more basic things as they kind of learn the different steps. But at any point, do you feel like that you actually train these freelancers to kind of get them to the levels you want them to?
Yes,
Or because
absolutely.
because I feel like at the same time, you don't know what you're hiring,
Right.
right?
Right.
And how do you get to that point where you feel like, okay, you get someone in here and then you realize that this particular event has a lot of ladder work and they're afraid of heights?
Right.
That's kind of, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have at that point, I think.
Yes, I think so too. Right. You go to a wedding that has a pool and you're doing a pool installation, and the one freelancer brings a bathing suit because they're going to take care of the pool work, but then when you get there, they really, they mention they don't know how to swim. And so next thing I know, I'm in the pool in my clothes doing the installation. And it wasn't anyone's fault. It just is difficult to go through the process of communicating everything. But yes, as far as training people on the job, I think that that's a little bit of a thorn in the side of some designers who own their own businesses, and rightly so, because I've heard of big designers, huge names, where they train and have worked for 3 years with this person, started out as an intern, and have, trained them along the way. And then 3 years later, they break off and they start their own business and they become your biggest competitor. Well, part of where I come from, the position that I come from, is that there is a whole lot of business out there, and a whole lot of different types of business.
Right.
And there's room for so many people, so many different types of people. And if I want to grow people who can design the way I would like them to design, then I do train them. And I don't ever think of it as a losing proposition. I really think of it as raising someone up and giving them a chance to maybe at some point start their own business. And I think that's amazing. You know who, Sue McCleary, Passion Flower Sue, has sort of that mindset too, because she's published books. She's amazing. And she's so watched because she's just so cutting edge and so innovative. And she would have to have a heart to want to teach people and raise people up that, sure, sometime they may compete with me. But if you approach your business like that, then you're going to lose. But if you're giving people and you're putting out there information, raising people up, collaborating with people, then your business grows exponentially. You're not lonely. You're helping people, and life is good. I know this is a weird time to be talking about that. It may sound like, really Pollyanna, but I just think that if you approach your business from a position of fear, then you're going to be making decisions that end up as if you were approaching them from a position of fear. It's just not going to be a growth opportunity for you and your business. But if you're approaching it from a position of love, which sounds so cliche, but from a position of wanting to help people, again, pretty cliche, but you end up just having a better life. I know it's really, I'm saying it out loud. I sound like a total
I'm hearing it because I've seen it. I've seen this in action. I've had customers who went through life viewing every other person as this competition.
Yeah.
Or they're copying me, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. And some of it could have been true. I mean, I'm not going to say they're
absolutely
wrong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and your eyes end up getting, and I know I've even talked about this before on the podcast, but I feel like your eyes end up getting on this negative train, right. And that's all you see is you just see the negative and negative and negative. Right. And like it becomes it fosters this paranoia almost at some point. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to begin to break that cycle and to begin to get out there and genuinely, you know, pour yourself into your own business and focus on your own business
Right.
because of that. And I know that I'm not trying to dismiss this as lighthearted, because I've had conversations. I know people who have really been affected by what you described earlier, you know, where this person that was their right-hand person left to start their own business and they didn't see it coming. And then the next thing you know, you not only did you lose your right hand, but you also now have this competition.
Right.
And it's a very difficult position. And I feel like if people can have honest communication about it, I feel like in a way it can be worked through. But I think that if you've been in the industry for any time, more than 5 years, you've got to know that this is an industry filled with creative entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And people, just like a clothing designer, you may apprentice or you may work for someone else, but if you have your own ideas, you have your own creative process, that sometimes you're ready to be like the butterfly and break loose and go fly. And I feel like that's a natural process in this world, but it's still a hard process. And
I agree. I absolutely agree. And there are so many different stories I've heard where people have to contact an attorney to present someone with a cease and desist. And rightly so. And the gal that broke away and became the big competition, that was heartbreaking for the woman who put so much time and energy into training this person. And she was heartbroken. Right. And I absolutely get that. I think, though, if you go into it knowing that if you're hiring someone who is a real go-getter and who will definitely run their own business someday, then treat that as if you're mentoring that person. Mm. And once they do begin to fly, you are, you're happy for them, but maybe it's happened to me too. I'll look at the social media of some of the folks that I've worked with before and I'm like, oh gosh, that's awesome. They're doing better than I am. Then you know what? I click off of social media because that's hurting me. And I struggle with depression. I do. My mom used to say to me, when you're tired, everything looks black to you. And it does. So, you know what, you've got to do a whole bunch of stuff to take care of yourself, particularly in this type of environment that we're in now. You get enough rest, you eat well, you get some walks, you exercise, whatever. And you take care of those around you by giving back. And that way it lightens the darkness, at least for me. But bringing in people to help you run your business is the only way you're going to be able to grow your business. So you have to decide, do I want to grow my business? And how do I want to grow my business? In Canada, I think it's Canada, some designers have the people they work with sign a, what's it called? It's not a non-disclose, it's a non-compete, where if you're working with me and I train you, then you can't be a florist anywhere else for 3 years after you leave this business. And I think that in Canada, that must work for people, but I'm so relieved that it's not like that here, because I just don't think that's right. And I think that if we begin to think of freelancers and business owners as both being business owners, it's a business-to-business transaction, yes, then everybody gets treated fairly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I really I don't know, I'm glad you said that. I really do. One thing I was wondering, when you are talking with these people, with freelancers, how do you figure out maybe what level they're at? You take them at their word? Do you see photographs of their work? And this sounds negative for me to say. Do you assume that work is their work? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you kind of navigate that part? Because I know a lot of people, well, just like the swimming incident you mentioned earlier, they say one thing, but then, nobody knew that you'd be working in 6 feet of water instead of 3 feet of water. And, it's just things happen. But, how do you kind of navigate that?
I think that if I hire people that I have trained myself and have,
or maybe you worked with them on another wedding for someone else.
yes, and have met people and have seen their work. But if I hire someone that I have not worked with, it's a great idea to kind of check their references. They're a business. They're going to come and consult with you as a private contractor. And so, hey, can you give me 2 or 3 references of folks that you've worked with in the past? What do you, to interview them, really, to really interview them. Tell me about a time where things fell apart and what you had to do to get it back together. What kind of a worker are you? Are you slow and steady, get it done right the first time? Are you just get it done because it's got to get done, I need both of those types of workers. Because at some point it's like, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be done. So, just asking them. And also that's where the whole standardization comes in, because I have a list of skills that they can look at and choose. Have you ever run a team before? Do you know how to do mechanics for blah, blah, blah? And I'm happy to teach you that, but I just need to know what you know, so that going into this situation, it'll help me know how many people to bring in.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. One thing I always like to ask, and you've already shared so much, and I always say this because it's always seems unfair, but I am wondering, have you ever had a piece of advice that someone gave you that really meant a lot? Or do you have your own piece of advice that you'd like to share?
Yeah. When I was really first starting out, I picked some designers that I really admired and wrote to them. And it was amazing how many of them wrote back to me. And I just said, hey, I'm just starting this business, and anything you would do differently than you did. And an amazing designer wrote back. Her name's Sarah Winward.
Oh, yeah.
She wrote back, and she was pretty new at the time too. And she said, don't take every job that comes your way. You need to find a balance. Do the work that you want to be doing and find a balance, because you're going to burn yourself out if you take every job that comes. And that's great advice for someone who doesn't need to take every job that comes their way. But I think it's great advice really for everybody. If you're working with a bride that just doesn't feel right, you know that you're not communicating well, you're not clicking, then choose not to work with that bride. Choose to find someone who will work better with that bride and be able to give her something that, whatever it is that she wants. So I got a call recently from this nice mom who's a floral designer. And she said, hey, I need all sorts of wired gardenias and wired, all sorts of super delicate bouquet for her daughter. And I thought it through, and I decided, that's not really my thing. It's Holly Chappell's thing. So I picked up the phone and called Holly Chappell, because she's going to do a much better job at giving this family what they need than I could ever do. Than I could ever do. So that was one piece of advice I got. Choose your clients. Do work that will be Instagrammable, and work that won't be Instagrammable, and just know that you're going to be doing some jobs that are going to pay the bills. And that's okay too. If there's Pokemon on the table, so be it. Get a good camera and take photos, like you said, take photos beforehand. What advice? Yes, the piece of advice that I would give is don't wait too long to get help. Don't hold on so tight to your business and your creative vision that you don't get help. I waited way too long. And the freedom that comes with being able to bring people in. Oh my gosh, I can even right now, I don't know if you just saw me take this huge breath of relief. It is so hard. I hated being up at 2:00 in the morning doing centerpieces, looking at the 10 more that I had to get done. And I'm alone in the basement I don't want to work like that. That is not what I want to be doing at this point in my life, or maybe at some point it was, but so it doesn't move the dial enough on the profits to bring someone in to help you. It just doesn't move the dial enough. So bring people in. And for me, I'm putting my name on everything, as are all designers. And so I feel really strongly about when folks come in to work with me, I'll say to them, hey, would you mind? I'm going to do a sample right here with you now. And as I'm doing the sample, it's how I train people too. I'm thinking, okay, so right now I'm looking for a place that needs a little more color. Right here, I'm going to tuck it in. Oh, and I'm going to pull this out a little bit further to give it a little bit more movement. So I'm talking through what's happening in my noggin so that they understand what's in my head. And I provide them with a photo. And then I say to them, hey, after you're done, would you mind if I zhuzh it and put my name on it? And if I feel like I want to or need to. And so everybody's expectation is that I'm going to put my hands on everything. And I've gotten to the point with a ton of my freelancers now where I don't have to do that. I still always will do a sample in front of them so that they know exactly what I'm thinking, so I can communicate to them what I'm hoping for the bride, what she's hoping for. And that communication is so important. But that's an incredibly long answer. But the bottom line is, don't be afraid.
Good.
Yeah, bring in help.
Yeah, that's so good, because I feel like a lot of times when you're doing that communicating, it's like they know what you're looking for. You're making sure there's not any holes in the color palette or that there's this three-dimensional kind of dancing of the flowers or however you want to look at it. And it's like, how else do people know? I mean, you've got to tell them.
They don't.
And also by sharing the fact that you're going to come back through and you're going to, put your hand on it and, just check everything. You also, in a way, you take that maybe that burden off some people. And you also create that expectation, like, don't be offended if I do this.
Right. Exactly.
Because I do this with everybody,
Well, yeah. And I'm super controlling of the look that I'm going for. So I'll provide them a bunch of photos of the arch. This is the type of tightness that I'm looking for. This is the spread of the flowers I'm looking for. This is the weight of the vine I'm looking for. And so it's 3 different photos. I'm here for you. Get started maybe on the vines or whatever, and I'll check in with you in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Just communicate as best you can. And what happens to me when I am tired and things do start to look a little bit black is I also lose words. I'm a lousy communicator when I'm stressed and tired. So I start saying things like, yeah, put the thingy over, by the thing. And it's terrible. It's terrible. But I know that going into it.
I totally understand that.
I know.
We do that here all the time. And I'm like, what? I don't know. Anyway, I love it. But the thing is you know that about yourself.
Yeah.
And the thing is, a lot of times we could be much more effective if we at least are honest with ourselves first, and then how we approach people. So I love that. Well, Sue, I know that we could have spoken for another hour easily. It's hard to believe it's already flown by, but thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for sharing all these great ideas with everybody.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure.